Oh, and happy Monday, everyone. You're in great company today. Our show, as always, is all about people, recognising that it really is okay to not be okay. So turn up your radio because it's the 13th of March today, 2017, and a long weekend to boot. Thanks again, Steve, for your very waist-thickening box of chocolates. I'm sure listening to your show has gained me a few extra kilos today. It was so good. Anyway, we have an amazing panel of people today, not just the one specialness as always. We have a special guest today. We actually have four. I have everyone from past 80s workmates to the most divine neighbours in the entire world. But we all have something in common, and that is the absolute outrage around the absence of basic human rights when we're choosing a lifelong partner in Australia. My question is this: legitimate legislation or just downright homegrown homophobia? To help me pick apart like fussy children at a dinner table, I welcome with much joy and pride my bevy of beautiful men, special guests. We have Darren, we've got George, we've got Michael and Paul. They're all very biblical names, aren't they?
Yes.
Oh, and listen to them go, those beautiful baritone voices. They're all giggling like schoolgirls because they're a little bit nervous, so I'm going to calm things down a little bit. But we do know each other. All of us have known each other for a long time, and however, we even joined each other at a dinner party later last year and had quite an animated conversation. George, you weren't there because you were working. But the three of us, Darren, Michael and Paul, all talked about the absolute disparity in human rights around choosing the people that you marry. But before we kick off, I thought we'd prefix our discussion with something that I copied off the Australian Human Rights Commission website, and it describes human rights here in Australia, I was shocked. Here we go. Human rights recognise the inherent value of each person, regardless of background, where we live, what we look like, what we think, or what we believe. They are based on principles of dignity, equality, and mutual respect, which are shared across cultures, religions, and philosophies. They're about being treated fairly, treating others fairly, and having the ability to make genuine choices in our daily lives. Respect for human rights is the cornerstone of strong communities in which everyone can make a contribution we feel included. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations on the 10th of December 1948, sets out the basic rights and freedoms that apply to all people. Drafted in the aftermath of World War II, it has become a foundation document that has inspired many legally binding international human rights laws. Our Australian government has agreed to uphold and respect many of these human rights treaties, including International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, Convention on the Rights of the Child, Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So sorry guys, not only does this appear that you're not a priority because you're gay, but always men have been, they've fallen off the radar here. So who wants to kick off with that? Darren.
Oh gosh, okay.
Had you read that before?
I had actually, only because you'd called me on here and I thought I'd better do a little bit of research.
Yes.
But you know, it's interesting. I mean, if we look back at 2009 when we had the Senate inquiry.
Yes.
And there were calls for the public to talk about whether they supported it or not. The MPs around the country had 11,000 submissions. The majority of those were actually from heterosexual people that had actually, submitted on behalf of family, friends, work colleagues.
Yes.
That could understand that there's some disparity and that it was time for change. We're 8 years on.
Can I speak? I was just going to say that's 8 years ago. I just did the quick maths on that.
It's ridiculous, and we still haven't moved.
I built a child in that time. Rory's now 8 years old, so there you go.
Yeah, and this is the thing. I think it's quite strange. And, if you look at Western society, in fact, all of the English-speaking world at the moment have same-sex legislation that is critically important for LGBTI citizens that pay the same taxes. So I think we're the last laggard in the civilised West to actually move towards equality, and that's quite depressing. And we'll talk about that later, I'm sure, when we talk about our own individual circumstances a little bit, or touch on it.
And my own individual circumstance that's relating to this, yes.
That's, it's just interesting.
You used the word laggard before. I'd never heard that before. What does that mean?
Well, we're just lagging behind the progressive social...
But it is a real word. You just didn't make it up.
I think it might be a British word, maybe. You realise I've come back to Australia. Britain.
That's right.
For my sins.
I have. But let me take the chance also to formally introduce our other panel members here. So we've got Paul on the end in his blue and white striped T-shirt, looking glamorous as ever. Paul, welcome to my show.
Thank you, Rae. Pleasure to be here.
We have lived next door to each other for almost 18 years, but never have appeared on radio together. Are you impressed with my ability to bring this stuff to air?
Very impressed.
Yes. And we've got Paul, who is Michael's. We have to call you a partner, don't we?
Yes.
We can't call you husband.
Not husband yet, no. But hopefully one day.
But Michael and Paul did become engaged on the 25th of January last year at the very top of the Eiffel Tower.
Yes, we did.
I did shed a tear that day when I saw that.
Not only you, this one. Paul shed quite a few tears that day.
But I became so excited thinking, gosh, Australia's on board with this stuff. They're going to come back. We're going to have a wedding. I get to buy an awesome dress and go to probably one of the most elaborate, beautiful weddings ever. But unfortunately, no, we've got that on hold still.
No, it hasn't happened. That was the plan.
Yes.
But unfortunately not.
Yeah.
So we're still waiting. As Darren said, it's 8 years ago and we're still waiting and nothing's changed. So it's quite frustrating.
And I want to say also, we're talking about human rights here. This is not about gay marriage. It's about a basic human right to marry somebody that you love. And, right from the get-go, I have to say, having lived next door to you guys for 18 years and bringing up children next door to you and animals, you are an absolute testament to what the marriage institution should be.
Oh, thank you.
Never heard you fight. Well, you've got probably soundproofing on yours. But, you're an absolute perfect example of what a great union should be. That is so deserved of just joining that in marriage. So
thank you.
Hopefully today we can make some change through our discussion.
Hopefully.
Yes.
And of course we've already heard from Darren. Hello, Darren. And you've dragged in at the very last moment your beautiful husband, because we can call George your husband in the UK.
Yeah, we can. So it's quite good for us in that sense that when we travel, we've got a legally binding document that does rate George as next of kin, which is something that when an Australian enters into a civil union, it's not necessarily enforceable.
So is that enforceable here now that you're living here in Australia?
To an extent, but there are still some elements of society here that can legally discriminate. If you're a religious body or an institution like a hospital that's religious owned, you can discriminate still.
Really?
And that is something that is a problem. And civil unions generally aren't always recognised by hospitals, schools, insurers and even government officials. Not necessarily, I'm not just talking about Australia, but I'm talking about when you travel, and this is a bit generalistic, but a lot of LGBTI citizens do have higher disposable income.
Yes.
And they travel more, and they aren't protected internationally as a consequence if they aren't married. So there are broader complications than just looking at it at an Australian level. And you're spot on. I mean, it's about a fundamental human right, without a doubt.
Yes, and that there's been some very public examples of same-sex marriages that haven't been recognised, where a partner of so many years and depth has no rights at all when their partner passes away. And I think you were telling me about a specific one. Yeah,
it was last year. There was an instance, and I think it was well publicised here, which is great because, any publicity is good publicity, right? Including this.
I think so.
But, if you look at it, there was a UK couple that were out here on holiday and a partner had a tragic accident and passed away. And, on his death certificate, I think it was in South Australia, and there was a huge uproar about it last January.
Yes.
But fundamentally, the upshot was that he wasn't deemed next of kin because legally there wasn't anything that could get his name on the death certificate of his partner, which effectively meant that, as humiliating as it was, he had to contact his father-in-law, who happened to agree with the marriage. Imagine if he couldn't, right? Or didn't, sorry.
Or couldn't.
Or couldn't. And to organise the funeral and all the arrangements as he wasn't deemed next of kin. So it's those sort of issues that you front into, and you don't really have that legal safety net. And it's even more challenging, I think, for those of us that have in LGBTI communities children, and that creates an even greater level of complexity where it's absolutely fundamentally required to get same-sex marriage on a equal
Absolutely.
platform.
And this also filters into, human rights around people with mental health challenges and mental disability that don't have the same rights as well, around marriage, around children, and around, if somebody should pass away. So I actually appeared on Jeremy's On the Spectrum program yesterday, which was all about autism. And we were talking about, marriage of autistic people as well. And, there's ramifications there as well. You're here with Rae Bonney and my bevy of beautiful men in my studio, wondering why the Australian government won't recognise and support the basic human right of freely marrying your one true love. Opening up the conversation, Michael, we're going to talk a little bit about disparity.
Yep.
And, this is something that comes up time and time again, the disparity in legislation, the disparity in rights, and you were going to talk a little bit about...
next of kin.
Next of kin.
That's one area.
Yes.
A lot of people out there don't realise that as a gay couple, Paul and I have been together 27 years now.
Is that all?
That's all. So we met when we were very, very, very young.
You terrible people. Shame you on wanting to get married.
Just some examples of disparity. A few years ago, I was rushed to hospital in the middle of the night for some surgery.
I remember that.
Yes, and I was in emergency on my own, wondering where Paul was, assuming he was just out there filling in paperwork.
Oh, he was around at my house doing some painting.
I've only recently found out from Paul that he wasn't allowed into emergency because he wasn't next of kin.
Wow.
And Paul recently had a bit of a health scare, and since then we've actually had to go through the legal process of enduring power of attorney for medical and financial, just so if anything does happen to either one of us, I have the right to say pull the plug on Paul, and he has the right to say to pull the plug on me for do not resuscitate. Financial power of attorney, and that's not cheap when you've got to get that done.
I was going to say contributing to the economy another way, you guys. Good on you.
And that just covers us for medical and financial emergency situations. It still doesn't cover us putting in on documentation, hospital admission forms that Paul is my next of kin because we're not married. It doesn't make him automatically my next of kin.
Yeah.
Another example is superannuation. We're all contributing to superannuation.
Yes.
Even though I have Paul and Paul has me as his, beneficiary.
Beneficiary, yes.
We still, as a couple, or a same-sex couple that aren't married, have to sign a binding death beneficiary form every 3 years to ensure that if something happens to either one of us, Paul gets my superannuation, I get his superannuation.
And that doesn't come free, I imagine?
That is free, fortunately, from the super funds. Yes, that is free.
Good on you, super funds.
You have to remember to actually do it.
And luckily our super fund does send a reminder and say your beneficiary is lapsing, you need to redo it. So we've redone it, but it's every 3 years. And a lot of heterosexual couples, straight single people, don't realise that we have to go through all this rigmarole to make sure that we're covered because we're not legally married.
But for people like me, it's a basic human right that just goes through the process and
we're paying exactly the same taxes as everybody else in this country. My marrying Paul will not affect anybody's life in this country except our life. So
and mine, of course, because
yours,
I get to go to the wedding.
And you get to go to the wedding. But I just don't understand why we're still where we are in 2017. in the John Howard changed the Marriage Act back in 2004 to make it between a man and a woman.
Yes.
There was no hoo-ha, no referendum, no plebiscite. It was just done. I hate to quote Tony Abbott at the best of times, but Malcolm Turnbull should just make a captain's call and change the legislation. There's no need. No one should have the right to tell me I can't marry the person I love and have been with for 27 years. And why should the general public have a say in who I'm allowed to marry?
Exactly, because you don't have a say in who anyone else marries.
So it's wrong.
Do you know what? That's the end of the show. It's wrong. Wind it up. Let's just play music. But Darren is just about to have a kitten at the moment because he and George are actually sitting beautifully together. Most beautiful couple. We'll get some photos of this and put it on the website. But
that's how we always sit, Rae.
I know, right? In fact, I was very, very lucky. Not only do I live next door to Michael and Paul, but Darren I've known since I was about 18, 17 years old, and we worked together. We did, and we did lose a bit of contact during that time, but we came together again, and the next time we saw each other, I was in London and I went to Darren and George's house for a sleepover, and it was one of the best nights of my life. Gay people really do know how to do it, so just make the marriage legal, please. But you were going to talk about disparity as well.
Yeah, I just think that, it's arguably the most important decision that any individual can ever make, and that's committing to, a lifelong union with another person. And, civil unions don't cut the mustard, and they never will. And, the challenge is that essentially what it actually does is it encourages discrimination.
Yes.
And essentially it does that by entrenching a second-class notion around the fact that as a same-sex couple you can't marry. And, for us, having already experienced that in the UK and the magic of that and being able to celebrate that love that you've got, enduring love.
Yes, legitimately.
Yes. Is incredibly important. And it's not only important for us as a couple who selfishly would love to get married here because, you could wear a fancy dress. And
I wouldn't wear the same dress to both weddings, though.
You'd have to mix it up a little bit. We'd be a bit worried. Cutting corners.
Might even wear some pants.
Yeah, you could do that. But yeah, I think it's more than that. It's about clearly giving the youth of today the feeling that they're not second-class citizens. And, it's that restriction, that violation that is the most terrible thing. And it's no different. And it's the same in the same generation. I feel like I'm sort of preaching. But,
Go for it.
The people of colour and people that were of different religious persuasions not so long ago couldn't marry either.
That's right. There's a movie about it at the moment.
Yeah, there is. And so, and people that were, disabled couldn't marry. And you mentioned that earlier too. So I think that, this is something that we are fronting into from a human rights angle.
Yes.
Because there is a disparity. And
I like that you use the word violation. I know it sounds pretty strong, but it's true. And the stripping of dignity. I think that's one of the most fundamental human rights that we have is just dignity. And, having that removed is just how that affects, and, where I sit with mental health, how that affects somebody's mental health is just so tremendous. But
what it says is it's not quite as okay. And
no, it's not okay at all. It's illegal.
Yeah.
That's what it's saying.
Yeah, it's saying. It's just, I think we need to move the needle.
But I know George has something to tell about his experience, given that you married an Englishman and brought him over to Australia. I know. So George, tell us about coming to Australia and how you got your visa to. Because George is a surgeon, by the way, and not to saying that he's an elevated person, but he is a person coming to Australia, contributing not only to our economy but to the health and safety of human beings as well. So.
Yeah, so after we got married, there was this whole visa process where we had to, or I had to collate...
Talk a bit closer to the mic too, George.
I had to collate every text message that we'd sent, and right from the beginning, you know, and some of the text, you're like, oh gosh, shall I put that in?
Love you,
but
Darren.
you have to, you know, you have to
invasive.
prove that your relationship is genuine. So
Yes.
every text, every romantic card, every email, every Facebook post.
Oh God, you guys
put
would have
that
had a
in.
truckload.
We had a lot of pokes.
I know what you guys are like.
We had a lot of pokes to put in that file. And then all of the photographs and all the different trips that we've made over
Yes.
the years. And you can see that we've been together for such a long time because you can see my hairline slowly going back. And that's not because I'm with Darren. I think that's just a genetic predisposition. So there was this huge, you know, amount of work to do to be able to prove that our relationship was genuine, that the marriage was genuine.
Yep.
And I was really surprised to learn that my marriage was recognised in the UK and in Australia House, which is on the Strand in central London.
Oh.
However, as soon as I land here in Australia, it goes back to being a de facto relationship.
So the default button gets hit. Bang,
Yeah,
you're back.
as soon as you land, which is sort of a surprise because in one way they're recognising the marriage, and I'm here with a permanent resident visa. And then on the other hand, actually you're not recognised. So it's a very confusing place to be. You're either recognised or you're not.
And I would use another word starting with S for that, George. Not surprised, I'll call it stupid. It's just stupid.
It's astonishing, really. So it's... Yeah, I just don't understand what the hold-up is here. And there's been such a fuss made about this whole plebiscite thing. And from my perspective, equality is not a popularity contest.
No.
Equality is equality. And it shouldn't be for the masses to determine whether a minority group should have the same rights as them.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely
This isn't a survey monkey sort of questionnaire that gets emailed to you. You know, these are people's lives.
Yes.
And
I think Michael said it really well before. It's not anyone's right to decide who you're going to love and who you're going to marry, unless that has, you know, dire consequences on, you know, the human condition, which is, you know, I was saying before in the break, it's okay for people who have, you know, backgrounds of domestic violence or, you know, child abuse, or, you know, it's okay for these people to marry. They have a perfect human right to marry whoever they like, even though they may be of danger to somebody.
That's right.
So, you know, it's let's go to a break anyway. Are you guys having fun on my show?
It's always great to be here. Thanks for having us.
I've never had 4 people in the studio before. We're encouraged to keep it down, but I think this is going particularly well. And now, who chose this song, One Day, by a band I can't even pronounce? Which one of you?
It was me.
Was that you, Darren? Can you please intro the song for me?
Oh, golly.
And
I
can.
Can.
It's One Day by a band starting with, looks like methylated spirits, but it's, I don't think it is.
It's actually by Matasayu.
Matasayu. And what does it mean to you?
Well, you know, that we want equality.
Yes.
We want it now. We don't want it tomorrow. We don't want a downgraded version of our status of our relationships. It's time.
And did you have to declare this on your paperwork, George, when you were declaring yourself to the Australian government that you and Darren played this song at some time?
I should have done.
Should have done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, you're listening to 94.1. It's 3WBC, and you're with Rae Bonney, joined in the studio by George, Darren, Michael and Paul. I'm Rae Bonney, joined in the studio today by George, Darren, Michael and Paul, and we're talking about the much contested issue of what freedom really means in Australia. And today we're using the context of same-sex marriage to illustrate where we need to make immediate change. So who's going to kick it off, guys? What does it feel like? I'll take me to ask you, Paul, actually. You've been a bit quiet there in the corner because you've actually been through a kind of a different journey. You know, we've talked with, you know, Michael and Darren and George about you sort of a more European influence, but you're dyed-in-the-wool Aussie coming into a European family. And what was that like?
It was interesting, to say the least, but taking into account how someone else's family, religion, cultural background can affect it, it took a lot of time to allow Michael's family to come to terms with how it was going.
So you were taking into account somebody else's feelings. You were respecting somebody else's right to perhaps not agree or not feel comfortable with your choices.
Yes.
But you were okay with that?
Yeah, yeah. So
It was only, I think it was only 10 years, wasn't it? Until
it was only about
broke
that long
the ice.
that it took to get through to the family that, yes, I am here and we actually are in love. But I think that's something that anybody would do when they are in love with their partner.
Yes.
And can see that there is a bigger picture, that it will improve, that it will progress, which it has.
Yes.
I've got some wonderful brother and sister-in-laws
Yes.
out of it. It's just a pity that our governments can't recognise it the same way.
Yes.
I don't see that happening, unfortunately.
But do you think sitting from the higher end, you know, if we're talking about government, the replication of stigma and stereotyping that goes on where Darren, or no, it was George and I talking before, that pretty much our basic communities or the bulk of our communities don't really care as long as you're happy. What you're doing,
correct.
Oh,
you
no,
know,
absolutely.
but we're constantly influenced by media and government to say, no, this is wrong. So you look at our younger generations coming through to say, well, why is this so?
Yeah, no, exactly. And the thing that brings it home to me quite often as well is that my mother's 85 and all she wants to see is the two of us get married,
Oh,
you know, and have a wonderful life together.
yes.
So it's thinking of that. It's the older generation are quite happy with it as well.
Well, we have a wonderful life together, but she'd love to see us get
Yeah.
married.
But you know, but that's another thing. It's not just about you guys wanting to get married. It's you have extended people in your lives that the marriage institution is there because it actually means something. You know,
That's right.
I mean, I'm not married mainly because nobody will have me, but but that's another story for another segment.
Yeah, but I think also, Ray, the other frustrating part at the moment is that our relationship is registered
Yes.
with the state government, so it's acknowledged there.
Yes.
But as a domestic relationship.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's another opportunity for government to take money off you as
Correct.
well.
Well, it
Yes.
is. Because
I don't mean to
getting-
sound really,
yeah.
what's that word? You know the word.
Yeah.
I ran out of words earlier this morning.
It is,
Yes.
because
And then getting close to retirement age,
Yes.
the federal government will then assess Michael's income to determine whether or not I'll receive a pension. But the federal government won't allow us to marry. So that's
Yeah.
bonkers.
I wonder when it's going to happen. You know, it is a question in my mind to think it's got to be soon because there's just too much. There's too many people talking about it and too many people wanting to do it. And I think, Darren, you've got some stats on how many same-sex relationships there are alive and well here in Australia. Is that right?
Yeah, I think, I mean,
Or in the
it was
world?
A couple of years ago, we had the census that was undertaken by the Bureau of
Not
Stats.
not the census, the
Yeah,
one
and,
that...
you know, people
Darren,
fudge
I
stuff
want to bring
anyway,
you back
right?
to that.
So, but
Was it
50,000?
was it the census?
The census?
The one where nobody could actually complete the census. Was it that
I
one?
think that was the one.
Yeah, so
it
and I'm
could be
sorry that
understated
I
then.
had to shut you down then, but you were going off on a tangent. I mean, you were going quickly down the road, but I just wanted to just put that little piece in there that how legitimate was that census anyway? You know, about what people want. So
yeah.
Good point.
Do
It is a
continue.
good point. And I think, you know, it might take a little if we've got time, but, you know, you've got 50,000 couples that did register the fact that they're in a relationship, a same-sex relationship. That's not a small number.
No.
And also, I think we've got an aging population. I think what you've said, Paul, is actually a really valid one also more broadly, because how are our nursing homes and our aged care facilities dealing with this topic of same-sex couples that are in their 80s and 90s that still need care?
Yes.
There aren't as many necessarily as that maybe identify,
Yes.
purely because it's you know, it's something that we are now identifying. And
So are you
coming
talking
up in our
about
real true
same-sex
selves.
couples cohabitating in
Correct.
aged care facilities?
Correct. How are they dealing with that, Ray? And it's
Well, we're not
for-
even
are we-
dealing with
we're not e-
heterosexual couples
Correct.
cohabitating. So
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So I think it's broad. It's a broader topic and one for another day. But yeah, it's just something. That
But also, Darren, one that most people don't think about either. We're just thinking about the topic here and now, like in real time, that gay people shouldn't get married. And all gay people, because we stereotype, are guys that look like you or girls that look like Me, actually, because I've got short hair. So, we're still not moving away that, people choose what makes them happy.
Yeah.
And that is it. That is the baseline for us, I think, not only as a country, but as, a global entity, that we start talking to people like that. And, even we just had Michelle in the studio before, and I was joking saying, hey, I know gay people, I've got gay friends. And she said, oh, yeah, I used to know some gay people, but I don't anymore. I said, Michelle, I was being sarcastic. But, maybe we shouldn't jest about it either. And, because people are people, disabled people. I get a few stereotypes attached to me. I'm a single parent. I talk too much, evidently. The girl with the short hair, why don't you grow it back long and look like a girl?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. So, I think we all live with it. But I think one of you said before, this is one of the biggest topics that we have going around at the moment, and it has so many positive ramifications to enabling this to happen quickly. Not like, what are we waiting for?
And especially, Rae, like, nobody chooses to be in a minority.
I do occasionally, George.
Wow.
You'd be the exception, right?
I can speak for myself and,
Yes.
Gay friends that I know. None of us have chosen to be gay. It's how we are. It's how we're born. It certainly wasn't anything to do with influence from parents or neglect in a certain aspect of my life. I just was. But what I do choose is my life partner.
Yes.
And to have that backed up by the Australian government, it says so much about a society if you're willing to embrace everybody.
Yes.
Not just people who happen to be white, middle class Christians.
Yeah.
If you can embrace everybody, the whole society is so much richer for it.
Oh, but even the way that you talk about it, I was born like that. You were born, full stop. And like what? A loving, caring, beautiful man?
Exactly.
So my rights, my human rights, should be
Yes.
the same as everybody's.
That's right. That's
and
right.
the fact that there is this discrepancy at the moment, I find it astonishing. I mean, Australia is so European, and everyone that I meet is so relaxed about the issue. Nobody really cares.
Yeah.
But it's such a drama here, which is astonishing. I mean, Australia's even in
Yes.
Australia's even in the Eurovision.
Yeah.
So
That's right. We're happy to do that. Yeah.
So my point being is that if you're in that mindset of sort
Yes.
of wanting to be part of Europe, and everyone's happy to celebrate that sort of event,
Yes.
celebrate every event.
But it's cool though, isn't
Gay
it?
marriage.
That's when it becomes cool.
Everything, celebrate it all.
Yes.
The more you celebrate, the more rich your life will be. And I think there's this hesitancy for the government to legislate for same-sex marriage because they're frightened of what might happen, or they're frightened of their position in government. Are people going to backlash against this? And I think society's moved far more forward than the government have.
Does anyone actually have an idea why this won't happen? Like, go.
My opinion is you've got the right-wing rednecks like Corey Bernardi spouting
Yes.
his venom and hatred across the TV about not supporting gay marriage or marriage equality, and the Family First Party, for example.
Yes.
George mentioned, if you're not Christian in this country, you've got no hope. Basically, that's what it is.
Yeah.
If you don't follow the Christian values, you've got no hope. And I don't understand how we are still going down the path of religion and politics in the same bucket. They should be separated. Church and state should have nothing to do with each other.
Yes.
I don't mind that. The church can interject all they like, but only when they start to pay tax.
Correct.
I'm happy. I'm absolutely happy for them to dictate my life. If I get a tax cut,
Yes.
because I'm second class at the moment, and they pay the tax that I save,
Yes.
I'm happy with that. But while they have that influence within our federal political mechanism, it's completely wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so wrong. I think you had a bit of a joke there, Darren. But because I don't think you would abide by what they wanted to do. But it's an awesome point that you make there.
The
Michael.
whole thing is with as far as the churches go, George and Darren are married are married from the UK, but not
Yes.
recognised here.
But they live here.
And they live here. Eventually, one day, we'll be recognised.
Yes.
Paul and I aren't married yet. One day, hopefully, we will be. But I've lost my train of thought now.
Can we go back to my dress, perhaps?
No, it wasn't that.
Because I really don't want to...
the churches.
The churches,
Sorry, I'm just
yes.
go back to the churches. Why would we want to get married in a religious institution that thinks we're going to hell and we're Satan's
That's
spawn,
right.
basically?
Yes.
So the churches should just stick their nose out of this whole issue.
That's right.
And just let the government do what it's got to do, pass the legislation, put the free vote to Parliament, pass it and move on.
Yes.
Start working on the health system, the school system, all the other stuff that needs to be done. They're just wasting too much time on this whole issue that should be a non-issue.
That's right. And so many outcomes of this issue end up in our health system.
Correct.
You know?
Yeah.
And look at, I think, let's just put all this aside and just think about the economic impact, right?
Oh, we're going to talk about
Right,
that
you're
in the
gonna talk
final
about it?
segment.
Yeah, okay,
Yes,
cool.
we are. We're going to
That's-
do a bit of a
that's important.
calculation, actually.
I think, anyone that's got half a brain would realise that it economically it makes sense, right?
Oh, employment, everything. We were getting a little bit raucous there between George, Darren, Michael and Paul and myself about we're not even having a debate today. It's a bit of a weigh-in. It's a bit of a lively conversation around human rights in Australia and the basic human right of being able to marry the person that you love. So guys, welcome to the last 7 minutes of the show. Next up we have the divine Ken Lyons delivering his health, and I think I might even be popping on his show before we go out on a date to Palace Cinemas in Baldwin, as we do very occasionally. Not sure what we're going to see, but Ken, I've got two in mind that start around 3 o'clock, so we should be good to go. Anyway, George, you have your calculator out. We did a bit of a calculation. Michael, being a maths head that he is, helped me with this. But we said if there's about 50,000 people in Australia couples in Australia, you can actually say that into the microphone, couples in Australia that can't get married because of this ridiculous breach of human rights. And say, Darren and George, how much did you spend in Australian dollars on your...
About 70,000, wasn't it, G?
It was
Yeah,
about
about-
$70,000.
Yeah, we had two
Yeah.
ceremonies, right? That's why. They're always a bit more expensive when you have a couple.
Of course. Is that because you have the believers and the non-believers?
It was the UK, we were right. We were completely okay.
That's
But
right.
yeah.
So, and then we'll do the basic calculation, but this is not forgetting all of the extracurricular stuff of people flying overseas to come to your wedding, travelling extensively afterwards, accommodation, all that sort of stuff. So 70 grand times that by 100,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
700 million.
That's $700 million that could come to Australia
Yeah,
Correct.
absolutely. Yeah.
right
But-
now.
And that's just on the wedding. That's not the visitors and the friends and the
That's
family.
right.
Travelling. We had friends that stayed in London for many days afterwards, and they went to the West End. They saw a show, restaurants,
Stayed
did
in
day
a
trips to
hotels.
Oxford and Cambridge.
Exactly.
So think of all that money that was sort of injected into the local areas. It was just fantastic.
Yeah, we had a fantastic time, and I think the fact is it's a celebration, right?
Yes.
So as much as it is anything else, and that
know,
involves
but-
people from everywhere.
But this is money. This is money we need. I mean, we've lost our mining industry, so this could replace mining, perhaps.
Well, it could certainly add
It
an
would
injection
help.
there. I mean, clearly, the states that offer the best weather aren't
Yes.
necessarily where we are at the moment. So, if you're looking at Perth and Queensland and or Western Australia rather, they are destinations that could
Yes.
draw significant
Could really
revenue.
use those
Yeah, definitely.
billions. Well, how many billion was it, George?
$700 million.
Million.
dollars.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
I like to say billion.
Billion
It sounds
great.
bigger. But that's only 100,000 couples that we know of as well. So there's other people that go, well, I can't get married, so therefore I'm not even going to bother thinking about it. But as soon as it's legislated, I reckon you could probably double that. So
Definitely. And, there are bodies out internationally that won't point honeymooners that are, marrying in other states to Australia purely because we aren't enabling same-sex marriage at the moment. It's not recognised. So.
Well, guys, we're coming to the end of the show now. We got to wrap it because Ken's got to get on, and we like to get onto our shows right on the dot of the hour. So he's coming up at 1 o'clock. And I'm not sure who's coming up after Ken, because usually Roger Peake would have his show, but he's actually moved all the way to Echuca. Do you know why? Because he can. And that's my point. So I thank you. It was such a pleasure to have you guys on the show today, not only because you are so articulate and able to get these messages out that are so desperately needed, but you're also individually, I didn't even say that correctly, individually, awesome friends of mine, and I don't know what I would do without you. So thank you.
Likewise.
Thanks,
Ray.
Ray.
That's all right.
Cheers.